Hello and welcome to this session on checking in on fashion. Last year at the Sustainability Summit, we had a deep dive on the fashion industry and sustainability. So I'm keen to check up on progress. How are things going? What are the initiatives? In particular, what is or isn't happening that could make a real difference at scale? And for this conversation, I'm joined by Maria Maclay, Industry Head for Luxury at Google, and Daniela Vega, Group Director of Sustainability at Selfridges Group. So welcome to both of you. Hello.
Hello.
Very good to have you with us. And just to get a sense of what your focus is on right now, perhaps we could start there with a bit of a description of the initiatives that you're involved in at the moment and how you hope they will contribute to pushing sustainability forward in the fashion area. So Maria, perhaps I could start with you. What is Google up to?
Absolutely. So my role is the industry head of luxury fashion, and I work together with luxury brands to help partner with them to grow their revenue and also build their brand with the Google lens. So looking at all of our different products and insights. But I'm also working on a project that was announced about a year and a half ago with Stella McCartney and also with the WWF to work on a tool that will allow fashion brands to source more sustainably at the raw material stage using our Google Cloud technology.
Okay, and is there, presumably working with fashion brands, you have an interest, a mutual interest, a shared interest in their selling more and their being effective in reaching their customers and so on. So is there a kind of inherent contradiction there between the sustainability goal and the goal of just selling more stuff?
Well, I think part of my job is to partner with companies to allow them to find consumers that are interested in their brands. I think, as you mentioned, absolutely consumers today have never been as more engaged and interested in sustainability, and they're looking more and more for brands that are embracing sustainability. I think that my job and my role is to help those brands that are, and I think the fashion industry overall has made huge strides and are making fantastic efforts. And my job is to help connect them with consumers who are interested and supporting of their brand.
Okay, so Daniela, if I can turn to you and Selfridges, what you have Project Earth. What is Project Earth?
Well, Project Earth is really the next step for us in a long history over the last 10 years of looking at sustainability through the lens of what we call retail activism. So it's about changing the way we shop and also changing the way we do business at the same time. So my role as sustainability director at Group is to focus on not only embedding sustainability as part of our core business plan, and we look at our destinations, we look at our people, we look at the products that we buy and sell, and we look at the experiences that we provide for our customers, and look at how we can use the convening power, because we're a house of brands, and collectively curate more responsible and sustainable product.
Okay, well, let's look at the way the state of play, if you like, in this whole area. Last year, I think we heard from about a lot of interesting initiatives in the fashion area. And yet, there are still, scandals crop up. The industry can't seem to shake off problems, and there are questions about whether, for all the noise about this, it's really making a dent in the problem in a serious way. So, take us up to date with what you think the trends have been over the past year, and then perhaps we'll look at how things will go in the future. But Maria, you mentioned that consumers are more aware of this. They want more. They're more concerned about where things have come from. What are the big trends that you notice over the past year or so?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that I think sustainability is mainstream. It's not going anywhere. Consumers are increasingly, we just released research last week consumers increasingly look at brands and place a value upon them about whether or not they believe that they are sustainable. So it clearly matters to consumers. This past July, we had twice the number of searches for sustainable fashion than we had the year prior. So I think that trend is only accelerating and will continue. I think to your point around what brands are doing, I think it's been quite encouraging to see the amount of activity the brands have undertaken, like Project Earth, as Daniela mentioned, contributing to this big issue with sustainability. The fashion industry contributes overall, according to the UN, 20% of all wastewater and 10% of all carbon emissions. I think what we've seen over the last year is a lot of partnerships and agreements and commitments by different brands to lean forward into the UN, kind of commitments behind making a dent on greenhouse gas emissions in other areas. One of the inhibitors, in my opinion, and this was released in the Pulse report about a year ago as well, is that while progress is being made, it is lessening in terms of the pace. And I think one of the reasons behind that is because scalable tools and scalable initiatives have been really, really difficult for fashion brands to implement, not because they don't want to, but simply because there's either data gaps or they essentially don't all have access to the same information. So I am hopeful and I am optimistic that both brands as well as consumers are truly committed. And I think technology has a real role to play to help empower and enable both companies as well as consumers on this journey, because sustainability in fashion, it's not easy. And so I think the progress that we have seen.
I want to come on to the sort of the hard parts in a bit, but I just want to sort of dig a little bit deeper about how deep this commitment and interest to sustainability really goes. Because yes, I'm sure it's true that there is much greater concern, much greater involvement. But when it comes down to that choice, should I or shouldn't I buy that extra piece of clothing, or will I buy the one that I really like because of the look and the feel and the price, compared with the one that I know is more sustainable? How much is that actually weighing into decisions? Can you measure that at Google? Can you even nudge it in a particular direction?
So we released a report last week that actually delved exactly into this. And so there is a gap, there's an action gap, 100%. And we also learned that consumers, are not as informed as they'd like to be in terms of sustainability. They're using shortcuts as well in terms of brands to judge whether or not they're sustainable. They're using certificates, they're using whether or not where they're sourcing, and they're using local as sort of key parameters to make some of those decisions. So while there is that gap, the other thing that we saw from our research is that when they looked at how they valued brands, increasingly consumers' perception of a brand is dependent upon whether or not they believe that brand to be sustainable. So I think that as there is a narrowing of more transparency, and as consumers become much more educated and informed, and as brands become much more transparent, that action gap, I think, will become much smaller.
Okay, Daniela, perhaps you like Google, I suppose you're also in the middle between consumers and the manufacturers. You're a collection of brands within your stores. What can you do to I suppose create the kind of shared interest in this and push things forward? How can you make sure that people really do value the sustainability side of things enough for it to change their decisions?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point about the values action gap, and I'm very hopeful that we're seeing that close with the rise in customer awareness and the way that they're voting with their wallets. And I suppose the role of a multi-brand retailer such as Selfridges is to really experiment to create the appetite and help shift that mindset of the customer. So through Project Earth, we've focused on three things. We've focused on materials, models and mindsets. And by materials, I mean setting some really stringent targets to reach a situation where we have better materials by 2025. So we've looked at the most environmentally impactful materials we sell. And by 2025, we will only sell the materials that meet our standards, to the point around customers looking at certification and being more aware of the impact.
Can I just ask you about that, because that's interesting, because you're hosting other brands within your stores. How much control over that do you have? Can you actually tell those stores that have or those brands that have concessions within Selfridges that you can't sell this because it's not green enough?
Yeah, so we have a kind of floor and ceiling approach where we can set the minimum criteria through a sort of compliance lens. But I think the greatest opportunity is to highlight the brands who are going further than the rest. So we do that at the moment through our Project Earth labeling scheme. So we have 4,000 products in our Project Earth labeling scheme, which highlights a more sustainable component of the product, whether that's cotton, more responsibly sourced leather, whether it's a certified palm oil. And so we're highlighting best in class in material use. So models is the second area that we focused on. And again, we need to create the demand for customers to shop differently. So we've launched a repair concierge service where you can bring anything in and have it repaired. We've launched a rental service where you can rent for a day, a week, a month, and try things you wouldn't necessarily have tried in a different way. And we've launched this week a resale service, Selfridges, where you can experience both buying and selling pre-loved items. So over the next year, we're going to see how those models work and build the demand and shift mindsets. And mindsets is probably, I think, the one area that gets forgotten the most when we talk about sustainable fashion and how we create this change. It's really an opportunity to co-create the journey with the customer. And make sure that it is that co-creation. So we have a series of events exploring everything from ethical consumption to in-store events for children planting seeds and upcycling their clothing.
So I want to. There's an awful lot in there, I suppose, and one of the points from the consumer end, I think, is that it sometimes gets confusing with so much choice, so much information often, but not necessarily standardized information. What do I really make of it? So it sounds as if Project Earth is tackling that problem, trying to get a sort of clear message across. But Google, you're kind of data experts. Are we on the way to getting making real progress on just having really better information and more accessible information on this? Because there's an action gap, but there's a huge data gap still, it seems to me, on sustainability and fashion.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more in terms of the data gap. And again, if you look at fashion sustainability, some of the biggest negative fashion impact is in the area where the data is most opaque, that people don't usually talk about. The majority of the impact is actually at raw material stage, so what they call tier 4 of the supply chain. So growing of cotton or the cutting down of trees for viscose, for example. And that's exactly one of the areas that we heard from a lot of CEOs, CMOs, and also from the industry, that although there's been amazing work done by lots of NGOs and trailblazers, there still is that gap to have more real-time access to data that will allow brands who want to do good understand the impact of making those sourcing decisions, the impact of sourcing on water pollution, water scarcity, air quality, and other factors. So with our project with the WWF, that's one of the areas that we're tackling. Using our Google for Earth data, we have about 20 petabytes of data from our mapping, or geospatial data, and we're using that to supplement some of the existing data within the industry. And our goal and aspiration is to, we're running the pilot right now, but make it open and accessible to those individuals who are making those sourcing decisions. Because you might have all the best intent in the world, but if you don't have data that is complete and reliable, it's quite difficult to know the impact of some of those decisions.
Absolutely. And at Selfridges, when you're doing something that would seem as simple as labeling products, you need the information to actually do clear and simple labeling. How have you found that process? Has it been quite a journey to get to the information you need to be sure that you're saying the right things on the labels?
Yes, it has, and it's a really, really challenging one. It relies on essentially third-party certification, which is why the project with Google is so exciting. I can't say how excited I am about the pilot and then the next steps, because the need for the data to be correct is such an important one. So what we can do at Selfridges is aggregate essentially third-party certification. And then what we can bring to it is a way to communicate that to customers, which is accessible, inviting, and very simple label. Example around cotton, where the customers know that they're buying a cotton that is produced, or a garment that's produced in a more responsible way. In that 4 seconds that they hold the product in their hand when they choose to buy it. If they want to find out more information, then there's more information online. But really, it needs to be very quick and simple and easy for customers to understand. Otherwise, as you say, overwhelm kicks in very, very quickly.
So I'd like to get at what you said. It was hard stuff. I'd like to get a little bit at the hard bits, and then we'll perhaps turn to the bits that are exciting for the future. But I think it's important to say, what are the really hard bits? What needs to happen in order for there to be the kind of change that would make a difference at a global scale? And what are the pressure points that you would like to see progress on? Maria, you first.
Sure. I mean, I think what's inspiring and what's encouraging is that there's so many individual brands who want to do good, who have been doing amazing efforts. I think one of the key blockers is exactly what you mentioned before, having the data at scale to be able to make informed decisions. And so again, while it's amazing that different brands have individual efforts, I think what it's really going to take and what's really difficult is ensuring that those brands and companies have reliable information and that there's partnerships quite likely from not just fashion, but from technology and other areas, so that we're able to crack this solution together and give access to information to brands to make those decisions, to make more informed decisions.
Daniela, the hardest bit as far as you're concerned?
I think the hardest bit is connecting the points that Maria mentioned with the mind shift with the customer and the way that business works. So shifting away from this kind of take, make, use, lose system that we currently have in fashion, and looking at a much more regenerative system where product is kept in use for longer, and when it is after use, it gets recycled and regenerated. And I think that kind of thinking, so the kind of the mechanism of the supply chain and the robust data connected with the consumer demand for more responsible products will be the biggest challenge for us.
Well, I can't get away in my own mind from the tension that seems to me to be at the heart of this. I mean, you want to sell more at Selfridges. That's, any good retailer wants to increase their turnover, and yet you want people to have longer product lifestyles and better products that are more sustainable. So how do you square that circle? Do you want to sell more, only sell better stuff? Is that it? Or would you be happy if you sold less if it was saving the planet?
I think that we can't avoid that the conversation around overconsumption, and here's where I think luxury can really play a part, because the message around buy to keep is very fitting for the luxury industry. You buy a branded luxury product, and you want it for life, and you want to pass it on to the next generation. So absolutely, I think that we need to recognize that fashion is one of the most polluting industries, and we need to recognize that overconsumption is a huge challenge, and we need to seriously grow these circular models, whether it's repair, resale, rental, so that they do start to minimize the need for new product in the system.
Maria, I think you wanted to say something. I interrupted you. Sorry.
No, no problem. I think building on what you said, I think kind of looking at even over the past few months, there's been, prior to the pandemic, a huge pressure from the fashion sector and for designers, quite frankly, to constantly have newness, constantly have new collections. And the expectations of consumers were always higher and higher. I think what I've seen over the past 6 months is that because of disruptions in supply chains, it has caused a moment for innovation within the industry, to rethink things, to really listen to consumer demand. So you've seen some really innovative companies like Gucci, for instance, which has decided to go seasonless, which has decided to focus more on timeless collections. And I think that goes back to your tension of producing more, producing better, potentially not having to have the next new thing every season, but have something that retains over time. I think ultimately consumers are going to make decisions based upon how they view brands. And what we've seen in terms of consumer behavior are models like reuse. Again, we saw rising searches around kind of these circular business models. Consumers, I think, increasingly will make choices about brands based upon whether or not they adhere to that. So I think it's, from a brand point of view, I think consumers are expecting that innovation. They're expecting them to embrace circular business models. And while today it still might be early days for certain consumers, I think over time that trend is going to accelerate.
And we're talking about consumers as if they're the same everywhere, but of course they're not, and businesses aren't the same everywhere. But do you think there are parts of the world or particular initiatives that you particularly admire and think are point the way for the future, not just in Britain, but right around the world? Where would you look to be the sort of ahead of the pack on all this? Maria, perhaps you first.
Gosh, such a difficult question. I'm trying to think what is the best way to answer this. I think, if you look at innovation in terms of material science, there's tons going on in terms of California, in terms of new types of materials, also in Italy, creating out of orange peels new types of fabric. I think that's really innovative and really, really interesting. I think in terms of kind of looking at the reuse markets, yes, of course, there are certain markets that have a higher adoption of that than others. So I wouldn't say there's one region where innovation is coming from or where innovation is better or different. And actually, I do think that over the past 6 months, because of the pandemic as well as other reasons, while there are differences, there's a lot more similarities. And we, again, are continuing to see these trends in terms of the interest in sustainability happening absolutely not uniformly, but absolutely consistently across markets. They just might look for it in different ways.
Is that also the case, for example, in China and in India? Because if you take, collectively a huge portion of the world's population, if it's not happening there, then at a global scale, you can do what you like in the more developed markets, but it's still, the global impact is going to be still the overall trend is going to be a negative one.
Yeah, I can comment on the insights that we're able to see. And from what I've seen, there is, obviously there's differences, but there is a global interest in terms of sustainability. I think part of the divide you're saying is also more in terms of who has access to certain tools, who has access to certain information, and also where are they on the consumption change as well.
Daniela?
I agree with Maria that it's not necessarily kind of different global regions, but I would go back to my focus on materials models mindsets, because I mean we're seeing huge innovation in very traditional luxury brands. Who'd have thought Prada would be making their products out of plastic from the ocean and committing to use plastic from the ocean for all of their products by the end of next year. It's a huge shift for a very traditional luxury brand to models such as the Her Collective that we launched in Selfridges that are changing the notion of ownership with fashion. So it's a peer-to-peer rental service where people are exchanging and forming communities around the concept of rental. So you can see all of this innovation coming through the technology to share clothes and sell your best loved clothes to extend the use, the mix of technology and thinking differently about how we express ourselves through fashion, and being more conscious of the supply chain and how that connects with climate change. I think is shifting the whole industry.
Now, we haven't got all that much time left, so I want to give you the chance to talk about what you're really excited about and the innovations that you think could make a big difference. A lot of what we've been talking about in this event is about things that make a difference at scale. So, orange peel may be all very well, but I'm not sure that's the ultimate solution. So what are the really big things or thing that you think is going to make a difference over the coming years to really change the game in the fashion industry? Maria, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I think for me, absolutely, as I mentioned before, it is if you don't have the information and you don't have access to it and you don't have scalable tools, yes, it's not about orange peels. It's about having information so that you can make different decisions. If you don't have that, then it's very difficult to even come up with an action plan as to what are the top 10 actions I should take to make an impact on the climate change. So what I'm most excited about is I think retail, we have so much data. We have so much data. And I think advances in machine learning, as well as kind of Google or Google Cloud technology, to the ability to process that data at scale, that's what really excites me. Not just from the project that we're working on, but if you look at what you can do to help better predict what customers might want to buy, how can you localize the buy to certain stores? How can you put less products into production so you have less wastage? Although it might not be as shiny and as beautiful as looking at a product which is amazing, which was created by recycled material, the processing of data and the ability to make decisions differently, for me, is the thing that I'm the most excited about.
And artificial intelligence in that, I mean, for example, in predicting demand, that sort of thing can really come into play, can it not?
Yeah, so machine learning, artificial intelligence, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, great. Daniela.
I guess mine is related to the data answer, but I think I'm excited about the opportunity that we have now, having taken this pause, and the need to build better, more resilient businesses, mixed with this rise in conscious consumption that we're seeing. I'm really excited about that because I think that it could drive change and in a much faster way, and as I said, create this co-creation between the customer and fashion. And I think we've seen that already. We've seen that with industry collaborations through the G7 Fashion Pact come together to share knowledge, to go further, faster. And we've seen that, but with the new brands that we have every day, and through Project Earth, where we've seen hundreds and hundreds of new brands with sustainability right at their heart, who are able to radically shift direction in a very dynamic and speedy way. As well as we're seeing that older, bigger global brands shift the way that they've been doing things quite significantly and pretty fast as well.
Well, thank you. We'll have to end it there, but I think you've both conveyed very well the sense that there's a lot going on, but also that it's not easy. So this is something I'm sure we're going to come back to time and time again to check up on progress. Best of luck with your efforts, and thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And please do stay tuned for our presentation from Sarasin and Partners, Achieving Net Zero, How to Invest and Press to Drive Climate Action. That's coming up. Thank you very much again. Thank you.